But one thing's for sure, when you've got chaotic tariffs that no one can possibly rely on, you're not getting any of the benefits that you might get from a tariff policy, and you're getting all of the disadvantages. And if you don't know what's going to happen, you're not going to lean in on the economy. That slows things down, and that's a bad cycle that then can drive us towards recession that many believe is now imminent.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you. And I figured it would be a good time to do a deep dive on what's currently happening with the US economy. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of different news stories coming at us, whether it has to do with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the jobs reports. So let's get into it, because President Donald Trump has threatened India, which of course is a major US trading partner, with an additional 25% tariff on all imports to the United States if they fail to reach a new deal with the US. Now that would bring the total tax that American consumers, of course, would pay on anything made in India and imported to the United States to a whopping 50%. Not only has inflation started to tick upward, partly due to Trump's trade policies, but recent jobs reports from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that the economy is in fact slowing down, with fewer job openings and slightly higher unemployment. So what did Trump do in response? Well, he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and accused her of cooking the numbers to make him look bad. Now, joining us to talk about all of this chaos in our economy is Robert Weissman, the co-president of the nonprofit consumer advocacy group, Public Citizen. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
So I have so much to ask you. I love looking into the economy, researching, figuring out what's going on, but I'm not an expert. And over at Public Citizen, the work that you guys do is so important, kind of sheds light on what's actually happening. You go deeper than the headlines and whatever drama is taking place between Trump and administration officials. Let's start with the firing of the commissioner for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The week began with Trump firing Dr. Erica McIntyre, and it's due to the fact that the jobs reports from previous months had been revised pretty significantly. And the latest report for the month of July showed that there were fewer jobs added to the economy than expected, about 75,000, when experts were expecting somewhere around 110,000 to 140,000. So first, let's talk a little bit about why the revisions were so significant. Like May's jobs total was revised lower to only 19,000 jobs. That was down from an initial estimate of 139,000. Then you take a look at June. The BLS said that the US economy added just 14,000 jobs in June, and that was a revision from the initial number of 147,000. So talk to me about how usual or unusual these types of revisions are.
Revisions in these numbers are pretty common, actually. I think we're going to see, even apart from just firing and the new chaos that's going to come at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're going to see larger revisions over time. And most people, of course, don't follow this stuff, but we're going to see bigger revisions normally because there aren't as many people working for the Bureau anymore due to Trump's cuts. And so they're just not going to get it as close to accurate on the first go round. But this is a nonpartisan agency. It's been around for forever. Everyone relies on the information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Everyone trusts it's the best you can get, or at least they did until Trump acted. And now we're looking at a problem way beyond just they don't have enough people to get it as close to right as possible the first time. Now we're looking at someone new coming in, and none of us can have any confidence at all that that person will lead an agency based on merit, facts, and neutral fact finding, instead of kowtowing to a president who may dismiss them too if he doesn't like what the results they deliver show.
Yeah, I see two things happening simultaneously. I agree with the point that you're making about cuts to federal agencies, including BLS, which would make it more difficult to gather the accurate data and numbers to get the initial reports as accurate as possible. I agree with that. At the same time, though, Trump wants to do this for political reasons. To me, that's very clear. He thinks everyone is out to get him. Everything is rigged against him. He's like the special victim of this country. And so I am worried about the political intentions of Donald Trump. But just real quick, putting that aside for a second, when it comes to the accuracy of these numbers, the initial jobs reports, I'm wondering if it makes any sense at all to have some sort of regulation ensuring that businesses respond to these surveys, because this is how it's done, right? You have employees over at BLS gathering data from business owners, and it's kind of hard to get the business owners to even respond to them. And so that's the problem that they've been running into. We don't have any federal laws that mandate that business owners respond to this agency. I know that in some states they have some regulations, but do you think it makes sense to have a federal law to get them to respond to these surveys?
That might not be a bad idea at all. I mean, there is a problem, which is they're trying to take these snapshots of the entire economy, and it's just too big to grab the whole thing at once. So doing representative surveys, and there is inevitably going to be some inaccuracy. But you're right, the inaccuracies are bigger when businesses don't reply to the survey information. And if they were required to, we'd have higher levels of response and more accurate numbers.
So let's talk a little bit about what your thoughts are in regard to why the economy is slowing down. You know, BLS will put these numbers out, but they don't really explain why there are fewer job openings, each month. What do you think is leading to this slowdown?
Yeah, I think we probably should be humble, right? It's easy to say there's a simple cause and effect. The economy is more complicated than that. And I think that the discussion about tariffs should be a little bit complicated because there actually is a reasonable role for tariffs in an industrial policy and promoting manufacturing. But one thing's for sure, when you've got chaotic tariffs that no one can possibly rely on, you're not getting any of the benefits that you might get from a tariff policy, and you're getting all of the disadvantages. So business is, as much as anything, really uncertain, as we all are, about what comes next. You just mentioned India as this one flashpoint for today, but that's for today, and it's going to be someone else tomorrow. There's no reason to believe that the tariffs in place are going to stay in place. So if you're trying to make investment decisions or hiring decisions, you really don't know what's going to happen. And if you don't know what's going to happen, you're not going to lean in on the economy. That slows things down, and that's a bad cycle that then can drive us towards recession that many believe is now imminent.
Right, and consumer sentiment is certainly going down. That's what the latest jobs report indicates. They're spending less money. People are very uncertain about the economy. And you're right to point out that, the threats against India indicate that we might be dealing with 50% tariffs today. But Trump always has an out, kind of baked into his threats. If you don't negotiate a better deal within the first 21 days of me making this statement, then we're going to implement these 50% tariffs. It's unlikely that that will be the outcome, that we're actually going to deal with 50% tariffs on Indian imports. However, let's take a quick look at a few of the countries that have, concluded their negotiations. They've reached an agreement. So for instance, Vietnam is another major US trading partner. And it turns out that following the negotiations and agreed upon essentially consumer taxes, all imports from Vietnam will be taxed at 20%. Anything that's been shipped to Vietnam and then imported to the United States will be tariffed at 40%. That is significantly higher than what we were dealing with previously. And I really fail to understand how this is a win for American consumers. Now, you might be able to argue it's a win in terms of increasing tariff revenue for the federal government, but isn't that basically an indirect additional tax on consumers at a time when we've cut taxes significantly for the wealthiest among us? I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, and of course, the concentration of wealth is the dominant story of what's really going on under this administration. But I think when we're thinking about these tariffs, just to go back to the jobs issue, that's what the Vietnam tariffs are right now. They may not be that in 2 weeks. So if you're an investor, an importer, or someone who's thinking, I can invest, I'm going to invest here now because I don't want to import anymore from Vietnam, no matter what, you just can't make sensible plans. And if you can't make sensible plans, you can't invest. If you can't invest, we don't have jobs. So that's the connection towards the downward spike and downward spiral in job creation. One reason a lot of people think explains the diminished numbers we saw from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The impact on consumers is a little bit uneven. For one thing, there's a ton of exceptions to all these top line tariffs as companies and industries are cutting different deals with the administration that aren't normally being reported, but are a big part of the corruption of this whole thing. So if you think your industry is about to be tariffed, the smartest thing you can do in Washington, D.C. is hire Ballard, which is the main Trump lobby firm. They have a special deal that will exempt you from whatever the tariffs are. So it's going to be uneven. Also, those top line numbers are misleading. Those aren't the prices that directly go to consumers. Those are the tax rate on wholesale imports. So then the retailers will absorb some of that cost. Profits may go down, but consumers will pay some. And these are very high level of tariffs by historic numbers. For better or worse, in general, with some important exceptions, tariffs coming into the United States pre-Trump and leaving China aside where he's changed the equation recently, tariffs coming to the United States are very close to zero generally. So when you're seeing numbers like 20%, it's compared to like 2% before. They are big changes. Again, tons of caveats because of all these exceptions. It doesn't apply exactly the way people think, but these are high levels of tariffs. And yeah, at the end of the day, consumers are going to pay some share of that. Again, if you had tariffs in the context of an industrial policy, you might say that makes sense because we're trying to do something that makes sense, which is shift manufacturing back to the United States. But this is not really a policy designed to do that at all. It's what he says, but it's not what it's really designed. It's primarily designed to show his dominance and also to extract concessions from other countries on things unrelated to manufacturing in the United States. So for example, we're pressuring other countries to change their rules on big tech, and we're threatening tariffs on them if they don't remove restrictions on big tech. We're threatening countries to say, hey, you have to raise your pharmaceutical price, and watch out for this because it's going to become more of a headline story in the next couple of weeks. You have to raise your pharmaceutical prices or we'll increase tariffs on you. So what this is really about is dominance on the one hand and favoritism for select industries on the other. It's really not part of a sensible industrial policy, which is what it's being advertised as.
Right, and this is the guy who ran an economic populist campaign purporting to want to look out for the little guy in the country. In the meantime, behind the scenes, he's looking out for tech firms, Silicon Valley, the very people, by the way, his base had huge issues with in the lead up to the election. But I got to get you to elaborate a little more on the pharmaceutical drug point that you just made, because I personally haven't read anything about that and I'm fascinated by it. Why exactly would Trump want other countries to raise their pharmaceutical drug prices?
So Trump has campaigned consistently, going back to running for office the first time, against high drug prices. And he says the US shouldn't pay more than other countries. That is a position that we as a consumer group and probably the leading advocate on drug prices in the United States completely agree with. Except he's never done anything about it. What pharma is trying to do is say, okay, we hear you. The problem isn't that prices are too high here. The problem is that they're too low in other rich countries.
Wow.
We're paying all the costs of research and development, they say, in the United States. And these other countries are free riding off of all the investments that and expenses we're paying in the United States. So Trump is now aggressively telling other countries, you have to raise your pharmaceutical prices up towards the US level. Theoretically, then the US level will come down a little bit, but the cutting edge of this policy is other countries must raise their drug prices. And he's speaking about this increasingly, and I think it's likely to come to the fore in the next few weeks.
I mean, that is so incredible. And then it also gives him the talking point of, look at what I did. Look at our drug prices compared to the drug prices in other countries. We used to pay so much more. But instead of telling the whole story about how he forced other countries to pay more than they needed to, right? He's going to make it seem like
I don't think he can succeed on this one, because if there's one thing people know, it's that they are paying way too much in drug prices, and you're not going to fool them by saying, "Well, England is paying more." They don't care; they want to pay less. Thank you for telling me about that. I hadn't heard about that, and I really hope that there's some good reporting on it because we want to cover it in depth. But I want to go to one final question to you, and it has to do with the
Federal Reserve and the endless pressure that Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, has been dealing with when it comes to Donald Trump wanting lower interest rates. Now, the Federal Reserve comes in at a time of high inflation and decides to increase interest rates. The whole point was to honestly lead to a little bit of economic strife, right? To increase unemployment, decrease demand when we have limited supply, and that's supposed to control inflation to some extent. So higher unemployment numbers would translate into something that you would assume Trump wants, which is lower interest rates. But in a recent CNBC interview, it seemed like he had some difficulty connecting the dots. I want to just go to that video real quick and get your thoughts on it.
Which number do you believe at this point? Because if you noticed, suddenly the chances of what you've wanted for months and argued for months, the chances of a rate cut soared because of these numbers. Do you not believe the current numbers because they're playing right into what you want the Fed and Jay Powell to do? They're not horrible, as you said, but perhaps with the tariffs, some businesses delayed some spending. Some consumers may have been less certain about the future. So maybe we're seeing a slight slowdown in labor, but you're going to get exactly what you want based on these numbers. Which ones do you believe? Do you not believe the revised numbers either?
It's not what I want. I don't want that. I wanted it a year ago. I wanted it a long time ago. Jay Powell is highly political, and I think, I call him too late. Jerome, too late, Powell.
Okay, so first thoughts on that whole exchange.
This puts me in an awkward position. I do not want to defend the Federal Reserve, and I do not want to defend the chair of the Federal Reserve, who I think generally has done a bad job. He actually has been too slow pre-Trump to lower interest rates. He's failed to regulate the banking sector, which is starting to spin out of control. He's done nothing on the existential threat of climate and how it intersects with the financial sector, which he oversees. That said, the Fed is set up to be independent of exactly the kind of pressure that Trump is applying, which is outrageous by any standard. Of course, we're used to Trump being outrageous, but this one makes a big difference. It's not how the Fed is supposed to work in our system, not supposed to be browbeat by the president like this or threatened with firing. The reason Powell won't lower the interest rates is because he's worried about the inflationary impact of the tariffs that Trump is pushing.
Right.
There's zero mystery about this. And that's why Trump's so upset. It's also why Powell feels a little bit hamstrung when he probably otherwise would be lowering interest rates at this time. So the problem that Trump is complaining about is 100% of his own making.
Okay, I agree with everything you just said, but I lied because I have one more question for you. Because
I'm here.
I see this situation developing right now where we could have high inflation, partly due to Trump's tariff policies. I mean, we have to wait and see. We don't know what's gonna happen, that's the uncertainty. But we could have high inflation in addition to high unemployment. And in an environment like that, what exactly is the Federal Reserve supposed to do?
That's a nightmare scenario, and it is entirely possible.
Okay.
It's entirely possible. And if you step back a little bit from some of the kind of day-to-day, week-to-week things we're talking about, and look at the big picture of what this administration is doing and has done, the primary thing it has done is pass this reconciliation bill, which will strip healthcare, meaning impoverish 17 million Americans, and concentrate wealth with a tax cut for the super rich and billionaires. And that's a situation where we don't have broad demand because people don't have money. The rich don't spend that much of what they've got. And people are just struggling. And we may actually get to this worst case scenario of stagflation. And in that scenario, neither the Federal Reserve nor anyone else has any great tools available.
Wow. Robert Weissman, thank you so much for joining us, co-president of Public Citizen. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and I hope you'll come back soon.
Anytime, thanks.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.